Before we begin the episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Chin Up Goggles, the new generation of vision training. Its simplistic design eliminates downward vision, improving a player's spatial awareness, anticipation, skill acquisition and execution. The findings have been supported by scientific research in CIT, now MTU. Be sure to visit chinupgoggles.com for more. Welcome back to the Sideline Live podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 47, I am delighted to be joined by Dublin Lions Head coach and one of Ireland's up-and-coming coaches, Erin Bracken. This is probably one of my favourite episodes to date as we delve deep into all things coaching, beyond basketball, and universal traits that all coaches can learn from. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hi Erin, thanks a million for coming back on the podcast.
No problem, thanks for having me.
So we're going to get into all things coaching, but you've a new role this year since our last chat last year. Take us through what's been happening for you over the last couple of months.
I suppose on the basketball front in terms of coaching, I'm now taking over the Dublin Lions men. So I was the assistant coach, I think, the last time I was talking to you, and we were kind of planning for our season of National League, but now we're still doing the same, but I'm the head coach now, so it's a little bit different. And then, I've taken up the role with Basketball Ireland as well as the South Dublin development officer.
Brilliant. So I suppose I asked a couple of people for questions to come in, and one of them in particular was deciding to pursue men's basketball and kind of going down the route of pursuing the men's game. And I suppose as a female, how do you find that going into a male-dominated aspect of the sport, and how come you didn't maybe pursue the female side of things at the adult level?
I suppose it just kind of made sense at the time. I was after doing my master's in Belfast and I had a good relationship with Rob White from Dublin Lions, and he was the head coach there and he needed an assistant. So when he reached out to me after completing the master's, it just made sense. The same year I was actually offered the Liffey Celtic Super League head coaching role, but I had played with them the year before, and it just made sense for me to kind of go with the men and kind of learn as an assistant rather than me stepping into a head coaching role with all my friends, that's just the way it happened. It was kind of by chance, really. Didn't really have in my head at that point that I was going to pursue, the men's team. My first kind of stint of coaching men was with Jordanstown when I was up there as part of my scholarship. I coached the men's university team, and that was fun and I really enjoyed it. And then when Rob asked me to come on board with the men in Dublin Lions, it kind of just seemed like a no-brainer. We had a good relationship. I respect him a lot and I'm always learning from him, so it just really made sense for me to step in there. I don't really feel like, as a woman, that it makes that much of a difference for me, just because I'm just comfortable with it at this point. I just I have a good relationship with a lot of the lads, or all the lads that I coach, and I'd hope that it was reciprocated, but it just makes my life easier. You're coaching those people and you're coaching basketball, and it doesn't really kind of bother me that it's men or women, or it is basketball and it's people that you're dealing with at the end of the day.
What were some of those lessons that you learned during your time as assistant coach with the Lions?
Oh God, there's so many. Probably we reflected so much on it throughout the year. We were playing Super League that year. When Rob first asked me, I don't think he probably thought they were going to end up getting promoted. I think he had in his head like promotion was probably never on the cards, and it was to build in National League for a little while. So when we got promoted, I suppose we were quite out of our depth, even though there was lots of games where they were quite close and we probably should have won, but we didn't. We were up with a couple of minutes to go and all that crack. But you just learn a lot about the game at the highest level. We both had a responsibility of watching a lot of video. You get to watch some of the best players in the league, week in, week out, and learn from them, learn from their tendencies. You get to talk to a lot of the coaches. A lot of the coaches in the league are actually very helpful as well, that you can reach out to them, pre-season, during the season, and, chat to them about different things. So really just the standard, in terms of execution, the difference between playing National League and playing Super League, is quite big.
Okay. Did you notice a difference with the lads in terms of the lessons they learned and kind of evolving during that time in the season, and now when they're coming back now and kind of taking those lessons from the Super League back to National League now?
Yeah, I think so. It's still early days right now, and it's obviously been a year and a half kind of since we've played competitive basketball. So it's going to take time to maybe even see if anything has kind of transferred over. I think our Super League year was difficult. We didn't really have a lot of continuity and kind of consistency within the squad. a few pros here and there. We'd people come in and come out, and it was just a tough time. But you could actually see come like kind of February when we decided to go with no like American or no pro just for a few weeks to focus on the Irish lads and to, let them play Super League basketball. They started to really understand what we were kind of looking for and what
Okay.
the way other teams played. And it's kind of similar to how we're going now. Like at the moment, we don't have a pro. And I know I was talking to you beforehand, but like we're kind of going away from bringing in 3, 4 professionals. We're kind of focusing on the Irish lads, like, and making sure that they're the ones that benefit and that they develop long term.
Mm-hmm. As a coach, how important is it to reflect, not only as we look back on now what's 2 years ago, but during the season? How often do you reflect on games and even maybe training sessions?
Probably just all the time. I feel like my brain is just constantly wired and I'm constantly thinking, and there's probably times where I overthink and overanalyze, but like I'm like I would always be reflecting. And like I'm lucky I have an assistant coach as well myself with the men now, and there's times where I can just sit down and watch and I can reflect even during practice,
Okay.
on certain things, on certain segments of practice. The same when I go home, like I'll always take down notes and I'll ask the assistant coach for his takeaways, and it's kind of a constant thing. I probably need to learn to switch my brain off sometimes, but I think it's so important to reflect, like, because it's in terms of awareness. Like you have to be aware, and video obviously can be a really big part of that. Even if you can record practices, record yourself, during timeouts or during practice, you can reflect on your own behaviors and actions.
Okay.
You can pick up on stuff in that you may not have gotten in real time. But yeah, no, it's so important to reflect, like, and I probably do it like all the time.
Do you video yourself during practices and timeouts?
This season I haven't started yet, but I will be. Like, it was one of the
Okay.
things that had been talked about even during the level 2 course that the coaching course that's going on at the moment, and during my masters. Like, I would have done it a little bit a couple of years ago during the masters, and it was something that I wanted to take forward. So like I have got everything set up. I've actually ordered like a mic from Amazon to be able to
Oh,
attach
right.
myself during
Yeah.
practice. Yeah, so it'll be like connected to the iPad or whatever, so I'll be able to kind of do it there. But like, yeah, no, it's something. I remember I had a meeting with JP Nurbin actually, going back when we just come out of kind of lockdown. I met him for a cup of coffee and he was chatting about different things, and he was the Liffey Celtics head coach last year, and didn't get to stay on with them this season. And like, he runs like a coaching culture like podcast, and he has his
Yes, I've
own.
listened to him actually. I
Yeah,
recognise the
yeah,
name.
so he has his own kind of channel and stuff like that. So he gave me a lot of advice on that sort of thing, like, in terms of awareness and reflection. So no, it is something that I'm going to have to adapt.
How did you find the first time listening to yourself on video or and watching yourself?
Yeah, it's really weird. You just have to be open, like, and then I suppose one of the other biggest ways, like, to reflect, and I know it's talked about a lot, is actually just questioning your athletes. Like, like,
Okay.
one of the things that we did at the beginning of this preseason was that we asked the players what they expected from us. So like, like, it's in terms of us also being able to kind of give feedback to athletes. Like, as coaches, you have to be open to receive feedback as well from your players. So
Okay.
sometimes it can be hard to hear, like, if someone says something and that you feel like it's negative, but like, it's important not to be defensive and to understand, like, that you're a part of this person's life, like, and if you're affecting them in a certain way, it matters. So I
Okay.
think feedback that way is important too, through the players.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned there about taking notes during practice. What are you kind of noting down? Is it more like, are you looking more at the drills? Are you now trying to maybe think forward to the game and how it's all going to translate? Or what do you actually note down?
I may not take actual, like, kind of written notes during practice. I'll be
Okay.
kind of taking them mentally, and then I'll put them in my phone, or I might take them in my phone kind of at times. But more like, at the moment, we're looking at, so we set our values and kind of, non-negotiables and standards and stuff like that as well during the meeting. So I'm kind of taking note of that. The assistant actually is kind of doing a lot of that, Paul. So I would be looking kind of on at some of the basketball side of things, just kind of everything, like, stuff that might stand out, stuff that players might say during, sessions. Like, at the same time, like, it's important for them to discover things themselves. So sometimes when you put them in a situation, the solutions just arise by how they're playing, and then you look at that and you go, oh, like, that actually worked, like, and it was a decision that they made on the court. Like, so there's just lots of stuff, like, that you would note maybe mentally. Like I said, my brain can be kind of weird and I remember everything, so I write everything down then.
What are those values and non-negotiable behaviours that you have as a team out of interest?
So yeah, so we had a chat and we put stuff on the board and we came up with, like, certain words, that were thrown around. But some that are like, the majority of them are actually cultural kind of based, like, and a lot of them actually aren't, in terms of like X's and O's or stuff that's going to happen on the court. We
Yeah.
have kind of talked a little bit about what our identity might be in terms of a team, like in our style of play. But like some of the words that were thrown around were kind of responsibility, discipline, consistency, effort, patience, even like values like such as fun. Like that it has to be fun. Like
Yeah.
there was lots of words thrown around, and then we did kind of whittle it down to like three or four kind of the most like important things that we were going to kind of go on. Some of the biggest things were consistency, like I said, like we were, and it's a consistency in everything, like even as from like as coaches as well, it was one of the things
Okay.
that they wanted from us was consistency. Yeah, but like there was a lot in it, like there was an awful lot in it that we had to hash out, but then we had to kind of pick some of the most important things that we knew that were going to be like absolutely like that was our standard and we're going to meet that, and that's the bare minimum, like is the standard, like because we did talk, one of the things that we did talk about a lot was playing time, because like I have like 14 players on the panel at the moment, so it's like, well, if everybody's healthy, you put 12 on the score sheet, those 12 are still not necessarily guaranteed to play, so we
Yeah.
kind of talked a little bit about what might determine playing time. Meeting the standard was the bare minimum, so like there's lots of
Okay.
other stuff there that you have to kind of think about too. So like being open with them in terms of that is important, like, and obviously that comes down to communication then. So that was another one that was thrown around, that we have to communicate with one another, like coaches to players, players to players, players to coaches. So
That's interesting. When you're chatting to the players about that responsibility, I guess when you get to the adult levels, particularly at Super League, National League, international level, how much of a responsibility is on the players in terms of everything, really?
well, like I suppose that's the point we want to get to, isn't it? Was that like they have complete ownership like over the program. We talk about like it being like an athlete centered environment or a person centered environment, and that it's not coach centric. That's the point we want to get to, is that as coaches we can empower the players to develop their own competence, their
Yeah.
ownership, that they build connections, with me, with each other, and that they're the ones that are actually the ones like that are their problem solving. They're the ones coming up with solutions. So like that is the point that we want to get to, is that the ownership is on them. It can be kind of led by the coaches, but it has to be driven by the athletes themselves.
Yeah, I coach underage ladies football, and I that's what I want to do, is we want to empower the players. But how do I go about that? Particularly, maybe if there's any coaches from listening from an underage level, how do you start to empower the players at a younger age?
It's hard. Like I think a lot of it does come down to questioning, and being able to ask the right question rather than give the right directions. Like oftentimes you might be rushed and in a hurry, and you just want to tell them the answer, and then that's it. And you tell them where they should be, what they should do, what decision they should make. And it's very easy to fall back into that trap as a coach, is that you're telling them. Whereas if you can ask the right question and have them come up with the solutions already, then they're on the path to making their own decision and to being more, kind of self-regulated, and they have autonomy. I think more often than not, then they remember it more when they come up with the solution themselves too, or if they ask you the question. I remember listening to a podcast before where a coach talked about how he would only give maybe one or two pieces of information. Something would happen where, let's say defensively, they did, I don't know, they made a read, and then the players stop and were like, oh, what do I do in that situation? And then you might ask them, well, what do you think? And if they don't give the right answer, then maybe you can give them the answer. But now they'll remember it because they're the ones that stopped and asked you, because they were in that position themselves. So straight away, then they'll have a better understanding of it. Whereas if you just regurgitate a bunch of information, it's more likely not going to stick.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned a couple of times there about your assistant coach. How do you find it hard to now delegate as a head coach, or do you find maybe because you were an assistant before that you don't find it as hard? Like, let's say for example, if you had taken that head coach job originally, maybe it would have been a little bit different because you wouldn't have had that experience as an assistant coach.
Yeah, I think like there's definitely times where it's probably hard, that I think lots of head coaches, even though they might say they're not, are a bit, a bit of control freaks. And,
Yeah.
like you want just to do things yourself, and, you have things in your own head and your own methods, and it's hard, but I find that having an assistant like makes me communicate more. Like it makes me
Okay.
explain what my thought process might be, makes me understand it more. Like I think with the assistant at the moment, like he has specific role, like, that helps me a lot, because it means that maybe I don't have to focus on that so much.
Okay.
Like I can focus on other things. And it was the same when I was with Rob. Like Rob would have given me an awful lot of responsibility, which I really appreciated because it helped me a lot. And there was never a time where we didn't get along, or that we didn't kind of work well together. So I think as like yeah like it 100% comes from me being an assistant, and I've been an assistant in different environments, and and with different teams. So I think it makes you appreciate an assistant coach then, and value them, and make sure that they feel valued. So I think that's one of my biggest goals as well, is to make sure that whoever I have as my assistants, like even with some of the underage teams I have assistant coaches, and they're players within the club, or maybe players that I coached previously on underage teams, and you're a mentor to them as well, so you have to make sure that you kind of play that role well.
Who were your mentors as you were starting to get into coaching, out of interest?
Well, I know I've mentioned Rob before. Like, he would have been one of them, because he even coached me when I was younger. He was one of my coaches when I was 13 or 14. I think on my previous podcast with you, I definitely mentioned my parents, because the two of them coach a lot. My mom coaches basketball. She was my first basketball coach. And then my dad coaches hurling and camogie. So we're a house full of sports people and coaches. So definitely my parents, like, they would have been kind of my mentors and role models in that sense, because like we can have conversations about sport, about coaching, about building relationships, about communication, everything in the house. So kind of they'd be probably the three main ones.
How important is it, as maybe a young coach or any coach really, to have a mentor and have someone that you can go to that's nearly, like you mentioned, your parents, they're not involved, let's say, with Dublin Lions, they don't have a role, but how valuable is it then to go to someone and talk to them maybe about something when they're kind of separate from that group, let's say?
Yeah, no, it's really important, like, because there's times where you need to vent, and that you need to just go off on one, and you could be frustrated with yourself, with your players, with people, and it might be all this built up kind of tension, and it's important obviously to kind of reflect yourself too, but it is really nice to have people outside of your circle to go to. Like, it's very important. Like, I know, like JP, I mentioned him before, like he's one of the ones that I would have been able to text or talk to, and we met that one time, and I know he's extremely busy, so I haven't actually contacted him in a while, but he was somebody that had said that I could pick up the phone to him. And there's other coaches around the country that are coaching at different levels that I know that I could pick up the phone to as well and talk to. Like I said, like, coaches are quite willing to help, and like to share their experiences, and to even just listen. Sometimes that's all you need, is for somebody to just listen to you, because it can be quite lonely. And I haven't felt that yet, but that's what I've heard from people, is that sometimes coaching can be quite lonely, as a head coach, especially if there's maybe some adversity, and you just don't know what way things are going to go. So I am kind of mentally prepared that there could be stuff in the season that that you have to go to someone else for help, or to just listen.
You mentioned there chatting to your parents about kind of building relationships. How do you actually build relationship with players and get that connection from, let's say I walk into the gym and I don't know you. How do you then build a relationship with me?
Well, I suppose it's just really important as a coach to know that you're coaching the person, and you're not actually coaching the sport. Like, you're coaching the people and the players and the kids and the athletes that come into the gym, and that you have to understand the needs and the values and the priorities of that actual person that walks into the gym and that's standing in front of you. And like, I think when you come to that realization, because like sometimes it can take a while, or sometimes people never come to it, but it does allow you to connect more with them, and it'll kind of inspire them to perform at higher levels, because they know that you care about them. So like, it's really important. I know I mentioned creating like a person-centered or an athlete-centered environment, that like you can't view the athletes as a collective group with the exact same needs. Like, more often than not, those that like the knowledge then transfer, like it just becomes one directional. Like, it becomes like a coach to athlete, rather than it being like a collaborative kind of approach. So I think when you're creating that environment, it's important to know that. I think like open conversations, like, like, how are you, how is work, how is school, like, like literally just talking to the person about any other things that are not basketball related. I know it seems quite obvious, but like sometimes it's hard. You need to know about your players as people, and what their situation is like. And I know it's probably like, some coaches may seem to be more approachable than others, and I think something for me anyway is that I was kind of told that I was approachable, or that I was kind of open, and that I was that was something that was a positive in terms of people would generally be able to feel okay with talking to me, like, and it's there's a trust there, but like that kind of results then in an environment where it's not like, it's not going to be coach to player, and it's not what it is going to be a collaborative approach then.
Why do you think? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say like that sometimes the flip side then, if you don't build those relationships and if it's just like I'm the coach, you're the players and that's it. And, I'm coaching basketball and I'm only there to teach like X's and O's and to try and teach the game, that that's where it becomes like where I'm telling them what to do. And then accuracy is valued more over like discovery or athlete discovery, where they're actually learning to love the game and they're learning to come up with solutions and to actually play.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And then particularly, let's say if something goes wrong, when you don't have that relationship, everything will then crumble, because it's like you're nearly waiting for something to happen, the ice to crack, and then when something goes bad because you don't have that relationship, it's gone, and maybe someone would leave the team, or something really bad like that.
Yeah. I just feel like it just helps the environment and it makes it more like it makes it fun. Like, that way, you're not there to be transactional. Like you're there to meet people and to build connections and to enjoy, each other's company and to play the game that we love to play along the way.
Out of interest, why do you think that person said you were approachable or open, or why do you think they called you that, or maybe what attributes do you have that allows you to be approachable and open as a coach?
I don't know, like, so I know I talked about feedback earlier on, like, and about asking your players, like what they need from you and what you can do better and this kind of thing. And like, I would have done kind of little surveys in the past with some of my players, like about what it was like to play for me. And like I said, sometimes it's hard, like it's important for your own development, as a coach. But I just think it probably comes down to, I know I said it already, but my parents, like, and in particular my dad, I know with his hurlers and his like kind of camogie players that he's had in the past, like he's always been somebody that everyone has said, oh, he's a real people person, and people can go to him. And he always was like, it would have been not a joke, because it's not a joke, but he'd be almost like a team therapist or somebody that like people would go to. And I don't know, I feel like maybe I kind of got some of those attributes that he had, and I just feel like that, I do build relationships with players to a point where that they feel like they can talk to me about stuff. And it's important for coaches to know these things. And of course there's always going to be, like a line where you are coaching basketball too, but it's the person that you're coaching. And, you need to understand what's going on, because in terms of performance then, or if you have a player that isn't performing well, or let's say misses a training session or whatever it is, and that you're not just going to be transactional and be like, well, he missed training and that's it, he's not going to play at the weekend, or, or whatever it is, like that might sway your decisions in terms of your coaching kind of decisions then, what is going to be, of course, you have to have the team's best interest at heart, but it's going to be those individual players that have different needs and that have different home situations. There's a book that I'm reading at the moment, actually, that one of the things he suggests in the book that you ask as a coach, that you ask your players to finish the sentence, one thing I wish my coach knew about me. And it was something like an exercise that he did with his underage kids. And he said, like, some of the stuff that they might come back with would quite shock you. And some of the kids might say something funny or something lighthearted, and then others might come back with something a little bit more serious that might explain a lot about why they even play the sport. So I think that's extremely important as well to take on board.
That's really interesting. I'm definitely going to rob that from you. But I was interested with the survey as well. I think I might rob this as well. But what kind of questions would you ask your players after you coach them?
I've done it a couple of times with certain people, where you just might ask them how it feels to be coached by you. Just generalized like feedback, what you could do better, whether it's even during timeouts or during sessions or during games. And like there might be certain players, because I know like it's obviously important as coaches to give feedback, like I talked about before, but some of your players may end up being able to kind of regulate you as well, or use certain keywords even during games. I know it was something that we talked about before, like there was on the coaching course as well, like was that it's important even for players to be able to regulate their coach, or like intervene sometimes, like if you're being unacceptable, or if there's something that you need to get your head screwed back on again, and it's important that players have that like permission to do that, and coaches have the they give them permission to do that.
I know what you mean. Do you use sort of any reminder, whether it's for yourself or with your players? Do you have sort of like a word that or even just like reset? Do you use that a lot with your players, just to kind of remember, just to switch back on and keep focused?
Yeah, well, in particular with the players, like during sessions and stuff like that, we would encourage them a lot to call their own timeouts, and to try and give each other feedback as much as possible. I know you probably heard of the rule of three, like with Mark Bennett and the implementation of the rule of three. Like that's something that we're really are trying to do, because I think a couple of years ago, before, it would have been mainly all kind of coach to player, and we're really trying to, like, that, empower them and give them ownership of the program. So obviously the first rule is that you try and regulate yourself. You get yourself back up to a standard, and it's about being self-aware as well, like, about what's going on in the game, and for you to be able to recognize, okay, look, last couple of possessions I wasn't acceptable, and then you try and regulate yourself. If that doesn't work, then it's on your teammate. You have to be open to receive, a bit of feedback. You have to be open, not defensive. Like, we've seen that before, where, a teammate will go up to someone and then it's and it's defensive straight away. So like, there's lots of ways that we're trying to kind of encourage them to do it. And then obviously then last resort, coach steps in and tries to regulate the player. So there is certain players at the moment, actually, that I would have like kind of keywords for, that we would talk about, like, what kind of success might look like, and if they get themselves into a state where they're frustrated, what they might need. So I've had a couple of conversations with certain players that may struggle to kind of regulate themselves during games already, and we've talked about what strategies we might be able to do to kind of help that, which is good. So I mean, we've only had a couple of practices and one preseason game, so I mean, it's going to take a bit of time, and I'm sure there's going to be stages in the season where things might go a bit mad, and then we have to be able to kind of come out of that then and problem solve and get ourselves back on track. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I'm interested, you mentioned there loads of feedback, and even from your surveys, how do you think that, were you always open to that feedback? Was that something you had to work on, or did you always literally look for that feedback?
It's a bit of both, I'd say. Like, like, I've probably been coaching basketball like since I was 15, so I was young, I was a kid, I was taken under 10 team, remember I mentioned before, with Anya O'Connor, and we would never, like, that would have been just, we were Super League players, or players at the time in the club, and that wouldn't have been a thing. But I suppose more so when I went and did my masters, it would have been the case of, they were common practices used from coaches and by coaches, to try and improve. So I knew that if I was going to have, if I was going to develop as a person, like, I can't expect my players to develop as people and, to have a growth mindset if I don't. So, of course, then I have to be open to it. And, like that, it's watching yourself back on video, asking your assistant coach, asking your players, even people like my parents that might come to a game, they might give me feedback. Like, it's just one of those things, like, you have to be open to it. There might be times where, I'm maybe defensive, and there's times where you might have your own method in your own head as to why you might have done something that someone else doesn't understand, which is also a situation too. But no, I have to say, like, this season now, I'm definitely approaching it with a more open kind of mindset, like, and making sure that it is a collaborative approach.
How do you think you've evolved as a coach? You mentioned there, like, when you're 15, sure, you're still a kid, like, but particularly maybe when you took coaching seriously, maybe through your masters, through your different experiences in a number of different teams. How do you think you've really evolved over the last number of years?
Well, I just think there's a number of things that will be a factor, but, like, in my head, like, this is my first year as a head coach, so I'm kind of feel like this is the start. Obviously, I have experienced, as assistant coaches. I've been away with some Irish teams, like, I've coached at like different age groups. I've coached boys, I've coached girls. Like, there's lots of those learnings that help you evolve. But I feel like it has to be ever evolving, and like, you have to adapt to certain situations. And I think this year, like, it's not that we have a clean slate, but it's like it's completely new. Everybody's been out of basketball for a year and a half. We just have to be grateful to be back on the court. And I have to keep learning, like, I have to keep pushing myself. And there probably will be times during the season where you'll be stumped over something and I'll get it wrong. And, like, I have to be open to that as well. And as much and all as it might kill you at the time, I know the saying, like, that you learn more from maybe your losses than you do from your wins or whatever. Like, as a coach, you have to be open to that as well. Like, if I make a mistake, or, like, I have to take responsibility, learn from it, and then try and adapt. So, like, obviously I think I have evolved, but, like, I think the game is ever evolving. People, like, personalities, within the team, they'll always evolve. Like, you'll have new people coming in and whatever. So you just have to be open to kind of be adaptable as well.
Out of interest, what difference do you kind of see between coaching men and women? Like, how do you find, like, approaching the two different genders, and kind of do you change much when you coach? You mentioned your girls' team, and I know it's different because they're adult and kids, but do you find much of a difference between the two?
So I've never actually coached women, so I've never actually coached, like, adult women. like that the opportunity was to coach like Liffey Celtics, which was my team, and they were all my friends, they were my social circle, so it just wasn't kind of the right fit. But I have two underage teams, under 14 boys and under 16 girls, and there is a difference, of course. Like, I think probably it's worth mentioning the webinar that Pat O'Neill facilitated back in November 2020 with the three women, Deirdre Brennan, Esther Goldsmith and Lisa Fallon. They talked a lot about the differences between men and women and boys and girls or whatever, and like there's physiological and psychological differences. So there's a lot of it that you can do very similarly to coach both genders, but the differences then can warrant like tailored coaching approaches, and you have to educate yourself on that. There's obvious physical differences and hormonal differences and anatomical differences, like, so it is really important as a coach to understand. Again, it's understanding the person, like, and about why they play. I think like one of the biggest differences that straight away I can see, and it's under 16 girls, under 14 boys. Under 16 girls, not that they're not competitive or that they're not talented, but a lot of it is very social. Like they want it to be like kind of socially inclusive. They're there for their friends. It's fun. That's why they play. Like they play to compete, and of course, like they want to get better and all that crack. But it's proven that boys and males are more like kind of linear and analytically driven. So they might have more of a like kind of competitive, it's like a fight or flight mindset. So it's just important to know that that's the way that they are, and that's their genetic makeup.
Totally, yeah. Out of interest, how do you balance saying, like with communication, let's say, how do you balance saying enough without overdoing, like you kind of mentioned there, the rule of three, making sure you don't overload your players, but how have you found communication, particularly maybe with the younger kids and versus the adults?
It's quite similar, to be fair. Like I am really trying to encourage the younger kids to talk as well and to understand what's going on. But what you do kind of find, I suppose, with both is that sometimes they just tell you what you think, what they think you want to hear as well. And, they'll just repeat something that you've said. And then you're like, do you really understand what I just said or what we said or what I asked, or are you just telling me what you think I want to hear? So like, it's, you have to kind of know that as well. But a lot of questioning still, like, like if there's a timeout, there's probably times where I probably talk, that I do talk too much, or I might overload them, and then oh God, that was overwhelming, and they're not going to remember half what, and you have to know that as well. But like a couple of key points, you maybe ask them what they have seen, what they've seen in the previous couple of possessions. What do we think our focus should be for the next couple of possessions? So it's about, again, it's about them coming up with this, like with the solutions, and that doesn't change whether it's underage or senior. Kind of. With especially I have to say, like the two underage teams are getting better at actually speaking. There was times where you'd ask a question and it'd be pure silence, and it's I don't want to say anything in case it's wrong, or I don't know what she means, and it is a process, like and then you get to the point where they all start talking over each other, and you have four of them telling you stuff, and then you have to be like, okay, no, like one person, so it is a real like kind of teaching thing as well, especially with the kids. I suppose questioning again, like like that has to be one of the biggest things in timeouts, where it's not me again giving them the answers or what we're looking for.
Okay, out of interest, do you have a specific structure for your timeouts or even halftime talks? I'm just out of interest because I coach Gaelic football, as I said, and I guess the approach with the water breaks, it basically turned into a basketball match, because in my head I had the 4 quarters laid out, and I had a specific structure for my timeouts, my water breaks. But I'm interested to hear, as a basketball coach, do you have a specific structure to those talks?
Probably without knowing that it was structured. Like I didn't do it purposely, and it wasn't like set out that way. And I know my goal kind of with the men in particular would be, let's say, for myself and the assistant coach to chat for a few seconds, maybe like just at the start of the timeout, and let the players maybe talk a little bit amongst themselves, and then we might come in and chat to them, ask a question, see what they think. If it's something specific where, let's say, I'm drawing a play up out of a timeout or out of, then that's different. Then I'm like maybe drawing up something on the board, like an out of bounds or a sideline or whatever. But like a generalized timeout, it also depends on who called it. If it was something from the other team, like then it's obviously maybe to kill momentum, or we are doing something well, or whatever it is. So generally, like you would take the sandwich approach of giving positive feedback and, reinforcing something that was good, maybe something that we could look at to change a little bit, or something that's constructive. And then when they go back out onto the court, then that they remember whatever it is, like, that's important, that, that they need to remember. But no, like, I wouldn't have like a generalized kind of structure. You have 1 minute,
Okay.
like, like, you have to be kind of intentional as well of to what goes on. Some we get right, some we probably get wrong, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. How do you
What would your
actually...
structure be with your...
Oh yeah, with the water breaks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I developed this with it was was it 12 or 13? It was last year during COVID, and the water breaks were introduced, and I remember the first match, and it was trying to get some sort of structure on the water breaks because everyone was frantic running around. Remember, they had put their bottles across the other side of the pitch, and I was like, oh my god. But anyway, basically I got them all to put the bottles near each other, but we kind of came up with like, I took the rule of 3 with them, so I did the 3 things we were going to do at the match. So I did that at the start of the game, and then I remember after a couple of weeks I let them choose maybe one of them. So I would say 2 of them. So I remember one in particular, they're really bad at when the opposition had a kick out. Oh my god, it was like they just forgot they had to mark anyone. So I was like, that was one of the main ones, and then they would pick 1 or 2 of them. And then I remember another one I had for them was like 3 blocks, and then when they'd come in, let's say in the water break, we'd run through like a checklist. Okay, did we get our 3 blocks? No. Okay, that's our next focus. Did we do this? Did we do that? So it loads of different ones, but I found the rule of 3 really good. And then in reflecting the game, we could use the rule of 3. Well, girls, did we do this well? And then I would mention it maybe during training sessions, but I just found it as a good, like, the rule of 3. Like, I remember we did the first match, I tried to do maybe 4 or 5, and sure, they couldn't remember any of them.
Yeah,
like, okay, I'll stick to the 3. But yeah, it was interesting. But I don't know if the water breaks will stay. It'd be interesting to hear. But
yeah,
I'm asking loads of the coaches, particularly in GAA, because I found it interesting having that extra time, and then learning how to not overload them, because sure, we weren't used to it in football. So yeah, that was just my approach to it. But how do you find encouraging the communication between players, particularly maybe when they don't know each other, to kind of give that instruction, and how do you facilitate that as a coach?
Yeah, I think even just the word that you just said in terms of facilitating, like, that's a big thing, is that coaches are there to facilitate, like, practice or whatever. Like, it's not like that I'm there to run a practice or that I'm dictating it. Like, it's to facilitate it. So you have to facilitate an environment where it's open for players to be able to communicate with one another and to communicate with you as a coach. So I think, like, especially with the older ones now, like, a lot of these lads, like, we have good chemistry. Like, they've played together, there's not really too many new faces, and some returning ones, but, like, players that have been there. So I suppose, like, there is friendships there, but then there's also players, like, that probably don't get along that well off the court, but you have to set that aside for the goals of the team, and then you still have to be able to communicate with another. So it has to be purposeful. I think one of the biggest things, let's say, on court, in terms of that specific to basketball stuff, we have a couple of younger players, like even younger, like under 17s, under 18s, kind of training with us, and obviously they're very quiet, and, like, they won't say a word, and they won't talk on the court, they don't really speak. And you can see the difference then, in some of the players, like, that are in their early 20s or they're 20, and they've played at a senior level. Like, it has to be kind of constant communication on the court. We talked about the rule of 3, obviously, like, and about how they kind of hold each other accountable, like, which again had been a problem in the past, because certain some players might get kind of defensive. And then you also see then that some players, maybe they try and talk to somebody on the court and tell them what they might have done or didn't do, but then also you also didn't do it, or you didn't do something on the last possession. So it's kind of getting that balance between, like, you have to just try and regulate yourself, and then you'll be able to hold someone else accountable, because you're meeting the standard and you're doing what you're supposed to do. Calling their own timeouts, like, there might be times during a scrimmage where I might have to call timeout, but, like, generally we'll try and tell the players, like, that if you feel like you need to call timeout, you call timeout.
Okay.
You encourage them to huddle up, like, let's say there's a stoppage in play or whatever, that they huddle and they might kind of just regroup. Those few seconds obviously help. Again, it's not us telling them, it's not us having to call timeout, because I remember before, myself and Rob used to feel like we could have done with 10 timeouts, and and there was times during the game where they didn't huddle up and kind of talk to each other about certain possessions, whereas you can see kind of at the moment they're doing that a lot better, even in practice. And again, like, they have to be kind of open to feedback. Again, they have to give each other permission, and it is the way in which you say things too. Like, we talked about how to give somebody feedback, and about how I know one of the things they slagged me for as well, but that I picked up from that I picked up from like podcasts and like JP, it was like the acronym ERN. So it was like encourage, remind, notify. So it was like you encourage your teammates, you can remind them before the action. Let's say you remind them to get over the screen or hedge the screen, and let's say they didn't do it, then you notify them that they didn't do it. But you take those steps, and when you're notifying them, you kind of take the emotion out of it. You may actually like fist bump them or high five them. You make an eye contact, and then you say like good job at the end, or good job getting back in transition or whatever. You give them something positive. So again, we're teaching the players to be able to do that as well, that it's not like just start shouting and roaring at someone because they didn't box out or because they didn't get back on defense, or or because they made a mistake. So like there is a way in which you have to give feedback as well, which we're trying to obviously do with them too.
That is brilliant. How did you find I know they were slagging you over the ERN, but have you noticed much of a difference with their feedback now? Are they now consciously kind of using that reminder?
Yeah, like you can see with some people, especially when things get heated and let's say games are really competitive, they might be very quick to, flick the lid and kind of shout at someone for doing something. And then you kind of have to remind them, like that's not the way we're going to give feedback. Like now, in fairness, we don't want to be like, it's not this soft approach of like that you can't kind of let roar either, like that happens, like it's sport, like, and they're men, like, and there is emotion in it, like, because they're passionate about the game, and you can't take that away from them either, and you can't take away that competitiveness. So obviously, but we have agreed that it's not personal, like, and that we have to leave that at the door, and that you have to just be open to take it, and then at the end you shake hands and then that's done, like, so there is a balance between it, like, we don't have to constantly try and, like, if you're in the heat at the moment and something happens, okay, you can say, okay, look, maybe I shouldn't have let it roar there or whatever, but it's not personal, like, so it just, that's the way we all have to look at it.
And was that something you did you sit down maybe with your first session, or was that something you realised over time that, the lads we need to learn how to give feedback to each other?
It was actually something that we talked about last season, so we didn't even mention that this season, because some of them remembered because they just take the piss out of me for it. But it was something that we did talk about, because it was evident that with some people giving feedback, whoever was trying to receive it would be on the defensive straight away, and regardless of how they were giving feedback. So we did talk about literally just being open to receiving it, but then, like I said, like, there is a balance. Like, if your teammates are constantly like worried about you, then they're not maybe focusing on themselves. So like we do talk about taking responsibility, like an ownership of your own state and your own performance first. Like that has to be the way. Of course, you want your teammates to hold each other accountable. That's where the leadership happens, where it's not coming from me or the assistant coach, and it's coming from the players, but you have to take responsibility yourself.
How do you find when there's leaders on the team? I could presume you're going to appoint your captain, but how do you approach the leaders on the team and creating a leader? Let's say maybe that's like, there's loads of different types of leaders. Like my own team, there's really vocal leaders, or there's just leaders that, in the game you're down by 5 points, they're just going to take this game by the scruff of the neck. How do you develop multiple leaders within the team, and how do you balance having enough leaders and enough of, maybe it's because sometimes, not everyone needs to be a leader on the team?
Yeah. It's actually a good question. It was something that I talked to JP about in my meeting with him, because I would be struggling to see, like, where it might come from. Like, we have, like, our captain, he's experienced, like, he's been there from the start of when Lions first kind of went National League. Like, he's actually one of the older players on the team. And like, he's very well respected, always speaks very logically. But we want, like, this could be possibly his last year of playing, so we're kind of like, and he kind of said that to me, like, like, that he may not be around a bit, like, so there's other circumstances there that, he wants to play one more year after missing out on the, season last year, whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'm looking at the really young group, and it's like, well, who is going to be, maybe vocal or like this. So at the moment, like, it's obviously only been a couple of weeks. Like, I have been impressed by a lot of them, like, and how they've kind of carried themselves and how they've led in different ways. But like, I think just like we talked about, like, facilitating practice in a way where it's creating an open environment, they'll kind of emerge a little bit, and then it will kind of come to light then who you can go to. Like, I've had different conversations with different people about their roles, and you don't want to give too much responsibility to certain people maybe that are only coming back in, and you want them to focus on other things. So we just kind of have to be kind of intentional about who we may be given responsibility to. And like, the whole title of captain and like leaders, like, I don't think it really matters, like, 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 I just think it's important to have leaders, but like, you don't necessarily have to name them, or like, you kind of know when you're playing, like, even I remember, like, there was a couple of us when we were playing Super League, like, like you may not have been the captain, but like you still do what leaders do, and like, and
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. Like, so that's what I would like us to get to, is that, we take responsibility for ourselves, we hold each other accountable. They can come and talk to me, and like the whole leader title, that'll come.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Did you mentioned there sitting down and having a chat with the player about their role? Is that something you did at the start of the year?
So I've talked to some people more than once, like, about, so I would have met them actually kind of during the summer or beforehand, when we were allowed to kind of go back out and have a cup of coffee and go for a walk and stuff.
Yeah,
When I was
yeah.
first when I was first kind of made head coach, like, I kind of met them all, or I spoke to some of them over the phone, and I met the ones that were kind of local. I had a bit of a chat about how they were feeling, and I've started to kind of meet them all again now, kind of during pre-season, that we've had a couple of sessions, that we've had one game. So over the next couple of weeks, I'll make sure that I'll have sat down with all of them at some point in some form of setting or environment to kind of chat. Spoke to some of them over the phone, so those like conversations are important, like, because it's so hard. Like, some of them probably expect a lot of themselves coming back in, but I know I talked about patience at the beginning, like, they just want everything to happen right now, overnight. And
Mm,
it's just, we kind of have to remind them that it's going to take time, and like, we just have to buy in and see that in a few weeks time we're going to look totally different than what we look right now. And even individual performances are only just going to get better with the more we play. So like, it's
yeah.
just kind of reminding them that, like, that I'm not kind of too hard on them too early in the season.
Yeah, exactly. I remember you did your fusion basketball presentation. I picked two quotes from it. One of them I thought was really important. We've kind of touched on already. What you praise is important rather than how you praise. Can you explain that one to the listeners a little bit?
Yeah, so I suppose it can be taken in loads of different contexts. Like, if you're talking about maybe basketball specific stuff, or, you know, like, I probably would nearly flip it in one way, in a way that, like, your words or actions and, stuff can stick with players, like, forever. Like, you don't get to choose what things stick and which ones that those players forget. So, you have to be intentional in everything you say and everything you do, because they'll remember certain things. And like, let's say you lose the plot and whatever, like, they'll remember that. Or if you say something that you might regret, then they could remember that. Like, so you have to praise, obviously, in a way that you want that stuff to stick with your players. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're talking about offense, and in particular, because I think that was the context we were talking about at the time, was that, if we do something well and we have a good basketball play, and we miss the shot, or, like, the outcome isn't the make, that we praise what happened before that. And if that's somebody making a good cut, that is
Mm-hmm.
after creating space for someone, you tell them, oh, that was a good cut. And like, and like, little things like that, in terms of, like, I don't have to be a cheerleader on the court, like, or on the
Yeah.
sideline. Like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to stand there clapping and encouraging and saying well done for every single thing, because then it kind of loses value as well. So you have to be specific, maybe in the small things that you might praise. Like, if someone sets a good screen, or, like, that extra pass, or, there's just small things that, if you praise those things, they're more likely to continue playing that type of way.
Totally. I think I took another quote from it. It was about offense. Offense can't be results driven. It's process driven. As you just said there, what happened before we scored? We're looking at the process rather than just the outcome of, let's say, scoring.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all it is. Like, we're trying to get them to play with a little bit more freedom, and kind of with a bit more space in, and just like with certain actions and stuff like that. So, like, if we take a good shot, like, and it's after coming from, let's say, like, what stuff that we're kind of, concepts that we're kind of looking at, like paint touches, post touches, ball reversals. If we've gotten that within a play and then we miss the shot, that's okay. Like, that
Yeah.
we just praise good basketball plays, and we encourage them to make those type of plays. Every possession if we can,
Ex-
um, or more possessions than not. Like, so yeah, that was just kind of that
exactly.
one.
Throughout your experience playing or coaching, what do you think is the most underrated skill or attribute in the game?
I was thinking it was so hard, because there's just so many things, and then people might say, oh, that's maybe not underrated, or like, that's important. But I think one of the things that I do kind of stress a little bit as well is about being present, and staying grounded, and not getting too high or too low. So I know with some of the groups that I've had before, during games, you might have certain players that will be up here when things are going well, and it's great, and then they'll dip straight back down if something happens, like they don't get a call, or the
Mm-hmm.
other team go on a run, and then they're just up and down, and then the game might kind of pass them by. But, like, I feel like with those players that can kind of stay in the moment and stay grounded, they generally will have, like, consistent performances, and that you can kind of rely on them, like, in a mental state. Like, so I feel
Yeah.
like that's probably one of the biggest things. And it was something, as a player, at times, where I kind of struggled and used to overanalyze things, and I used to kind of have my coach brain on, and I sometimes used to have to switch that off and just play. And
Yeah.
there's times where I have to try and remind the lads that like some of them are overthinking, and it's good that they're thinking, and that they're seeing things, but at the same time then you miss a certain amount of the game because you're overthinking. So I think
Yeah.
kind of trying to stay grounded and stay present is probably one of the ones that I would go with.
Do you think, can you teach that, or is that more just like a personality or character trait that the players just develop themselves?
I don't know. I actually don't know. It could be a bit of both. Like I think with me, like I got to the point where I was playing that I knew that I would probably be more of a benefit as a coach, like to people, because I felt like when I was
Okay.
playing, I just overthought everything. And like I used to get in my own head. No, genuinely I did. And like, I did, I got in my own head. And there'd be some games where I was grand and it was fine, but then there's other games where I just overthought everything, and then you're kind of worried about other people, and you're, like just over analyzing.
Hmm.
And then it's like paralysis by overanalysis or whatever the
Yeah.
saying is.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it could be maybe a bit of both. I honestly don't know.
What do you define as success? I've asked a couple of people this, but I suppose on the court as a player, I don't know if you're still playing. I think you were last year, but what do you define as success as a player, as a coach with your team, or just overall? What is your definition of success?
Um, I suppose this is hard as well. There could be so many, but I know I talked about it throughout. So I think I know like that our season will have been successful, or, my time, let's say with Dublin Lions, in terms of whatever my contract is or how many seasons that I'm going to be here, is that I will have been able to empower the players that they can develop their own confidence and ownership of the program, and that they build connections with each other and with me. And it'll have nothing got to do with what we win or whether we get promoted. And, those all of those things will be a bonus. And of course, we want to create a competitive culture. But it's in how we do that, and we can still compete. And it's not like a soft style of kind of coaching in terms of wanting it to be transformational. So I think if it can get to the point where I know that the athletes are taking responsibility and that they own the program and that they don't need to rely on me, and that they could run a practice or that they could run a game without really me being there, well, then that'll probably be successful.
Brilliant. Particularly with your younger teams, what lessons or values are you trying to instill and teach them, I suppose, as younger kids, learning the love of the game, really?
Yeah, it'd be similar like to the men in terms of like, the biggest thing for them is that we have fun. Like that we facilitate our practice where, an environment where they all get reps, like they all play a lot, like lots of small sided games, like lots of playing. That's how they'll develop. Um, that they don't complain. So like with the little boys, the under 14s, they like to complain a lot, or they
Right.
did previously at refs, like because they're extremely competitive, like to the point where you're reffing a scrimmage outside, and they want you to call it as if it's a All Ireland final. Like so there's these things like and they complain. They're very hard on themselves. So we had to kind of have a bit of a chat about like like just negativity, like in body language and this type of sort of thing. So that's kind of my focus with them, is to get them kind of really playing together. Like some of them are
Okay.
extremely talented, um, very good, like individually, trying to get them to kind of have that cohesion, like as a group. That's something they need to kind of learn. And then I've seen a big difference over the summer in with them, and especially now, I hope that when we get back indoors and we play kind of games that way, then like they'll see it a bit more as well. But yeah, like it's not going to be too different to the men. Like teach them discipline, responsibility. Like
Hmm.
trying to be consistent. Like it's all it's that's yeah, they're the same values really.
Yeah. Out of interest, during your time as a coach and as a player, you don't have to name anyone here, but what separates the good players from the best? What do you see as the difference there?
I know it's very obvious, but like it does be it's a work ethic thing as well. Like, like, and it's you genuinely, players will get rewarded by the work that they put in. And it's the same with coaches. Like, like I know for me, like I know during lockdown, it was a big thing where, uh, like there was lots of webinars, and, like podcasts became like a really big thing. And it's important, like, to educate yourself. So as coaches, like for us to be better, like we have to do that. You have to reflect, you have to educate yourself. You're not just going to show up week in, week out for those two practices and one game. Like it's
Hmm.
almost like an everyday thing that you're working on yourself. And it's the same as a player. And like they can be, it doesn't always have to be, let's say that you're in the gym every day, like you're looking after your sleep, your nutrition, like you can switch off and get your recovery. And then when you're working, that you're working your hardest. Like, so it's simple really, but not
Hmm.
everybody does it,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Do you think it's just a choice you have to make as players? Sometimes players make it subconsciously, because I think of people just have this phenomenal work ethic, and I don't think they've ever had to sit themselves down and say, look, I just need to work really hard. But I know other players that need to have that conversation with themselves and just say, look, I just need to ramp this up here.
Yeah, no, I do think it's a choice, because I know like it's very like that. You look at the likes of Kobe Bryant and, you know, people in the sport that are the best of the best, like that they would say that everybody has the same 24 hours in the day, like, you know, and it's what you do with that time that is what you're going to get back out of it. So yeah,
Totally.
I think it is a choice.
What are your thoughts on the opportunities, or maybe lack of, for coaches development, maybe particularly for females in Ireland now? I know since I've written this question, all I've seen on my timeline on Twitter is loads of coaching opportunities for females and loads of programmes from Sport Ireland and Basketball Ireland. Like, in fairness, it has really, really improved. But what do you think is the next step? How do we get more female coaches involved in the sport, whether it's basketball or other sports as well?
I think the first thing is that we provide the opportunities. You know, like even like at the moment, I have different talks with like Louise O'Loughlin's our women in sport lead in Westbar, and you know, like I'd be communicating with her around different things that we can do in terms of mentorship and, you know, things like that. But I think again, women have to want to do it. Like, you know, like that's what it boils down to too, is that like, you know, if it's not a priority for them, well then fine, you know, they're doing other things, that's grand. But if we provide the opportunity and we try and put things in place and then we learn from it, like if it doesn't go well, you know, that we can adjust, you know, but we need people to want to take part in it, and we, you know, that want to actually improve and get involved in coaching, you know, like, because that's where it starts. So yeah, no, I think the onus is on the actual women themselves, you know, to actually put themselves forward then for certain positions and to get involved in whatever program. Now we have to put together programs and make sure that there's, you know, opportunities in place. But yeah, I think it has to be a thing where they decide again that they're going to put themselves forward for it.
Yeah, you mentioned there a few minutes ago about, you know, coaches can't just show up to 2 training sessions a week in a match. It's always continuous learning, and you've mentioned books and podcasts. But is there any particular book or podcast that you'd recommend to any coaches listening, or really any resources that you've just found really helpful as your growth and development as a coach?
At the moment, I probably will just go with the book that I'm actually reading at the moment. I'm nearly finished it, but it's JP actually gave it to me a couple of weeks, or going back at the kind of during the summer, and it's called Every Moment Matters by John O'Sullivan. And again, it's just about coaches around the world. There's like little anecdotes and stuff in it. It's about basketball, but like he talks about other sports as well and coaches' experiences, and it's all kind of about like relationships and connections, and, you know, how to kind of like that create that athlete centered kind of environment. So like I'm enjoying it. It's a light enough read. Like, you know, it's nice like to kind of, you know, read about other people's experiences as well. And that's where the thing came from, in terms of somebody had asked their players, one thing I wish my coach like knew about me. So like just little things in that, like little kind of tasks that you can actually kind of take from it, that you can kind of bring forward to your own teams and program as well.
Brilliant. Look, Erin, thanks so much for your time. Thoroughly enjoyed that. There's loads of teaching points there for everyone. I've notes down beside me for all day, but thank you so much. I just want to wish you the very best of luck with Dublin Lions and beyond, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch again.
Thanks so much, Orla. Thanks a million. I enjoyed it as well.
A massive thank you to Erin for joining me today. I took plenty of notes during our chat, and I hope you got something from it. I'll be sure to leave all of our social media links in the description box below. If you did enjoy the episode and you are listening on Apple Podcasts, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a rating and a review, as it does help the show grow. Don't forget to check out the brand new website, thesidelinelive.com, for more. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.